You mentioned before we started this episode
yes.
that you looked up some interesting facts,
did.
and I'm eager to learn more about that from you.
I appreciate the offer to share. If we tell people you should move 25 to 35% of your money outside of the US, and you can talk a bit more about why we recommend that, and then 50 or 75% of your assets are in IRAs, the best and easiest way to do that is by internationalizing your IRA.
Welcome to the Swiss Money Secrets podcast, a podcast designed to cover all things offshore investing and banking from the Swiss perspective, in order to help Americans learn about how they can access and benefit from investing outside of the US and the US dollar. So guys, welcome back. We're excited for this episode of the Swiss Money Secrets podcast. Let's just dive right into it. I think today is going to be quite interesting. It's something that can add a lot of value to our listeners, as well as the people who are interested in offshore investing or offshore bank accounts. Our topic for today will be offshore IRAs and how you can move your individual retirement account offshore. Before we get into that, we're going to start, as we always do, with a little bit of Swiss news of what's happening, what are the rumblings in Switzerland. And as the US prepares for their 2-year lead up to our elections, we want to talk today about just a little bit about what's going on in Swiss politics and the Swiss election cycle. So maybe you guys could inform our beloved listeners and viewers of what's going on right now in Switzerland.
Yeah,
Sure.
we have an election coming up.
Yeah. We have our parliament renewal on October 22nd, so we always vote on Sundays. Typically people do that through mail-in ballots. You can also do it physically, but that's, I think, less popular. I think one canton even allows electronic voting. We live in Zurich. Here it's not possible, so we typically do it by mail. And this is something that happens every 4 years. It's quite exciting. I mean, an election cycle is always interesting to follow politicians, see what's happening, what's going on. It's certainly a very light version of what's happening in the US. I think our lead up to elections is typically 6 to maybe maximum 8 weeks. So we are now almost I think over the peak. I think people are already speaking about it less because the mail-in ballots have arrived in people's households. A lot of people have already voted. So the final 2 weeks, I think, is almost a little bit quieter than maybe 3-4 weeks out. But it will be interesting to see which parties are going to get the most seats. We have 2 chambers in parliament very similar to the US. We have the one chamber that represents the population of the country, and then the other chamber that represents our different cantons, which would be similar to your states.
Yeah. Interesting.
And it's also very interesting how many people run for the House or the what is it, the House of Representatives, kind of.
Yeah.
I mean, it's more than 5,000 people. That might not sound as much for Americans, but it is a lot here in Switzerland. So, and that's something which is very nice to see, because there's much more interest, much more people who want to participate in the government, and different than in the US, and we don't have to go too much into details, but we have something it's called a milice system, which means that people work, and then next to their work or to their regular job, they are in politics, they are in government, and so they make the decisions. And also another interesting fact is that the average age is about 44 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
So I just want to say the youngest person that is running is actually turning 18 on October 22nd. So this lady is still 17. On the election day, she's 18, so she is quite literally the youngest you could be to be voted into office. I mean, her chances are obviously very, very slim. But I think it's great that we have a system where also the threshold of trying is a lot lower, because I believe, and don't quote me on this, but I think the average budget of someone that's running that has a decent chance of winning is about 50,000 Swiss francs. And that's something that's, it's a lot of money, but it's obtainable to fundraise that. And what I also like is we had a change recently where you have more transparency in the funding of the campaign. So I think every campaign donation that's over a certain threshold, I believe it's 15,000 francs, has to be declared publicly where it's coming from. And I think that helps a lot in terms of just showing conflict of interest that certain politicians might have.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And for me, as an outsider living in the country, someone who can't vote, it's still fascinating to follow it and watch it and see how a democracy that was founded in a similar way to the United States functions today, now hundreds of years later. And I really enjoy watching it, and I do like the system of politicians being part-time. Yeah. I think that's something that could solve many problems in the world. But again, not going to go into the politics of it too much.
But maybe one last point I want to make is, even though the average age is about 44, 43 years, there are a lot of young people, but also older people. And a lot of the older people, they already had a career. And so they're at the stage now where they want to give back, where they want to involve themselves in the government and try to make something or improve the Swiss system in any way they can. And I think that's something which is beautiful that we have, that people really want to give back.
Yeah, I think that is a wonderful place to end it on Swiss politics and move into our topic for today. So again, as we mentioned at the beginning of the episode, we're going to be talking about moving your individual retirement account offshore, what that means, what are the possibilities, kind of what's involved, and is there value in moving your IRA offshore. So before we get into it, we want to clearly state that we are not IRA experts. We're not tax experts. We are involved in helping manage IRA accounts that are held offshore. So we'll be talking about that from our perspective and giving our insights and what we see and how we've seen it used to be beneficial for people looking to hold assets outside of their domestic market, in this case, the US. We personally only work, as we all know, but we only personally work with self-directed IRAs. So where you get into your retirement savings, obviously the American listeners know you have your 401k that can be, with certain stipulations, rolled over into a Roth IRA or a traditional IRA with all of those things. But as we move into that, I think maybe we should start out, or guys, I think we should start out by talking about why does it even make sense to move assets offshore? Is there value to hold investments offshore? And how that can help someone's portfolio structure.
Yeah, but I think before we move into that, it would also make sense to give the listeners an understanding of how much potential there is with IRAs, because it is really a big part of U.S. assets which are held in 401ks and IRAs. And you mentioned before we started this episode that you looked up some interesting facts, and I'm eager to learn more about that from you.
I appreciate the offer to share the facts that I have memorized for this episode. As Jess said, I mean, I'm not a retirement expert when it comes to the U.S. pension system, but I was interested because we get so many questions about IRAs to see how popular this scheme actually is. And I saw that over $7 trillion are being held in retirement plans currently, and that 90 million Americans are paying into a 401k plan. And 51% of employers are matching the contributions to a certain extent of the employees, which I think is very interesting. And another fact that I read that I found extremely fascinating is that from the 20s to 70s, in every life decade of Americans, retirement savings in such a plan like a 401k or a self-directed IRA makes up 50% or more of their total wealth. Mm-hmm. So a lot of money is being held in IRAs and in 401ks, and especially once the wealth of a person peaks, typically in their 50s, 60s, the average assets go up to 75%, or not the average, the portion of the wealth that is in retirement plans goes up to 75%. And I think that also explains why we get so much interest in moving retirement monies offshore, because if we tell people you should move 25 to 35% of your money outside of the US, and you can talk a bit more about why we recommend that, and then 50 or 75% of your assets are in IRAs, the best and easiest way to do that is by internationalizing your IRA. And I think that's something where a lot of people are not even aware of the option and the possibility, because it is complex. It does involve a lot of moving parts, and I think we get to that later in the conversation as well. But I find it very important to talk to people about how they can move the significant chunk of their money that is in retirement plans, how they can move that to diversify outside of the US.
Yeah, I think that's really, really good. I think I'm even surprised by those numbers. I didn't know that the majority of, 75% of your total wealth, 65 being held in retirement accounts, is an astounding number to me, and not in a bad way. It's impressive. I mean, the individual retirement accounts certainly have a lot of benefits for people to hold their wealth and invest their wealth in there. So as you mentioned, Jamie, you were talking about the percentage of what amount of wealth should be moved outside of the U.S. Maybe, Urs, you have some thoughts about that for Americans specifically looking to, truly diversify their portfolios or holdings outside of the U.S. and hold something that reflects the global wealth rather than just the domestic market.
Yeah, I think the structure, the possibilities the U.S. government created through these IRAs is quite astonishing, and I think it's a wonderful thing they did, because it gives you so much flexibility. It gives you power to decide on your own wealth, not necessarily as long as it is in a 401k, then it's usually with a solution the employer chooses. But with an IRA, you have a lot of possibilities, and you can also work with different tax structures, whether it's, you mentioned, Roth IRAs or traditional IRAs. And so, I believe that it is a great way to work on your wealth as well. And I could also imagine that one reason why it represents about 75% of your total wealth are exactly these liberties or these possibilities you have. And there is a study which argues that this 25 to 35% Jamie mentioned reduces the volatility of your overall wealth structure. So if you have all of your wealth in the US, you have usually a rather high volatility. I mean, there are great things in the US. There is a huge point to be invested in the US. But by just moving this 25 to 35% of your wealth offshore and diversified globally, it can reduce your volatility by a big portion. And so this is one part of it. And then, the classical argumentation of not having all your eggs in one basket. You really want to be diversified. You want to have assets in other currencies, in other geographical regions, which might not be as dependent to the US as if you would be directly in the US. For the same reasons, people also invest some of their IRA money, for example, in real estate. Or, as I said, the possibilities are very, very broad. And so there is a good reason to take one portion of it. Don't take all of it, but take one portion of it, move it offshore. We also have a lot of clients who combine it, who have a portion of the IRAs and then an individual account or in the name of their family trust or offshore trust, whatever they have. So you can really plan and structure your wealth in a way where it makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. When I was first woken up about the accessibility of offshore accounts in general, I thought it was the golden egg. I couldn't believe it. I thought, this is incredible. Mm-hmm. There's a legal way for Americans to get money outside of the U.S., get them directly invested into those foreign markets, into those foreign currencies, and really benefit from a global structure. Mm-hmm. And then learning about the ability to move your IRA offshore and not lose the tax benefits of it. So in a legal way, moving it offshore, it was like, man, this is amazing. And as you said, it's a beautiful thing. One of the good things that the U.S. government did was allowing for these IRA, the individual retirement accounts, and their ability to be so flexible for people.
And maybe one other point, which is also very important to stress, is that at a certain age you have to draw money from your IRA. And so imagine you have your whole IRA invested in the S&P 500 last year, and you have to start drawing money, and the markets are down 20%, and at that moment you have to take out money. That can be very frustrating. So if you have it like diversified within different investments which have a different volatility, which might be counter-cyclical, then you can really choose from where you take the money, and then maybe one year take it from there, and then the other year take it from another account, and so you can really work with that.
Yeah, I think that's something that's good just in advice in general, not holding your eggs in one basket. Same with your portfolio and what you're invested in, not holding them all in the same product or instrument, so that you aren't dependent on the woes and whims of that. You can really look around, and again, obviously adding that international component makes a big deal of looking at ups and downs of where your investments are, depending on what's happening in the world economy and what's happening in the markets, your domestic or the foreign ones. I think maybe we could then transition from that into kind of I guess what are the IRAs that we work with as a company, and what are kind of those setups, and then we'll transition into the process of what the account opening looks like, or how Americans can start this process and how they can move forward. So maybe Jamie, you could talk a little bit more about how which kinds of accounts we work with.
Yeah, so that's fairly straightforward because it's only self-directed IRAs, so that's pretty easy. I think one very important point that we probably can't stress enough is that we only move IRAs offshore if we can do it in like a tax-deferred way, or if we can keep the tax benefits that come with the US-based IRA. And the way we can do that is by working with a US-based administrator. So that means, just as like a quick recap for the people who might not have listened to every single episode, we are an independent asset manager, so we are not a bank. We work together with custodian banks. We have contractual agreements with the bank. The client has a contractual agreement with the bank. We have a contractual agreement with the client. So it's like a sort of triangle. If you move IRAs offshore, you have like a fourth party to that, and that would be the US-based administrator. And first, like on the first glance, that might sound more complex, but in reality, it's more straightforward and easier than if you set up a personal account, because the US-based administrator takes over a lot of the administrative workload. So what that means is, if you are interested, obviously, as usual, we set up a get-to-know each other meeting. We have to feel comfortable with each other. We have to answer any questions, go through all the information. And if after that conversation, both sides have the feeling that collaboration would make a lot of sense, we will then introduce the client to the administrator. In our case, it's a company based in Florida. You don't have to meet with them physically. You can get onboarded with them through correspondence, but we will make an introduction so the client can talk to the administrator. They can get acquainted with them as well, ask them all the questions that they have in terms of IRAs, and they are actually the IRA specialists. So when it comes to detailed questions about taxes and all of that, they can certainly help address that. Once a client has been onboarded with the administrator then works with us in our office to get the account opened. And that's also very important to note that the money goes through the administrator, but at the end of the day, it is held in Europe, in Switzerland, or in Liechtenstein, outside of the US. So it has to go through this administrator to keep the tax benefits and to do everything in a legal and compliant way. But at the end of the day, once everything has been set up, the money is being custodied outside of the US, and it is being invested by a company like ours that is focused on investment opportunities outside of the US and outside of the US dollar.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I mean, one of my roles here in the company is being heavily involved in a lot of these account opening process, especially with our custodian, or IRA administrator, not custodian, as well as the custodian bank. And I think it's really interesting to see when you look at the process, and you had mentioned how it seems maybe a little bit more complex. There may have been some graphs floating around in the video of what that structure looks like. But when you're working with the IRA administrator, it really does take a lot of the headache of paperwork outside of opening the account. I mean, there are certainly some documents you have to provide. When we are getting to know each other from a regulatory standpoint of your passport copy, maybe an investor profile with some information on your financial background, who you are. But then after some of that initial paperwork is taken away and you've been onboarded with the IRA administrator, they really do the paperwork. There's some information that you sign so that you can have access to the e-banking account on a read-only basis. But outside of that, there's really not a lot of paperwork and a lot of hassle for you in open the account, which for me personally makes a huge deal. I think, whenever I'm going through that process, I'm always really happy for the client knowing they don't have to deal with the paperwork. Where it's totally manageable, it's one less stress in your head, and it makes that process of moving offshore so much simpler and so much easier and just without that stress.
Yeah, and I think on top of like this misconception of the complexity of the paperwork, I think another thing that a lot of people don't realize is the accessibility. Yes, you need a certain amount of wealth saved up for this to make sense. It is a complex cross-border service that you're gonna acquire. But we start onboarding IRA clients from $250,000 upwards. And I think, as far as I know, we're the only company in Switzerland that starts offering those services from $250,000 upwards. So that's something that a lot of people have those ideas that you have to be like a very high profile celebrity or politician or billionaire or whatever for offshore solutions to even be considered, but that's not the case. You need a little bit of wealth saved up for sure, yes, but it's far less than most people think.
Yeah, I think that's one of the huge benefits of holding that 75%, of your wealth in there, and if you have that there, you're able to access it, and I think that makes it even more accessible. Urs, do you have something you want to say?
No, I mean it's very good explained. And, I think maybe if I can add one part, which is rather important to me, is that maybe now when you hear that, you think, okay, what happens to me after that? But like the end client stays involved at all time and has access to all the information and to us as the asset manager and to the bank. And so it's not like, oh, now there is this new triangle and I'm somewhere out of that. The client always stays involved and is informed of what is going on.
Oh, that's such an important point. Yeah. I mean, the communication part is something that we pride ourselves in. We have won awards for it in the past. I think we really talk very regularly to the clients, and that goes for the IRA clients as much as anyone else. So I think that's a great addition. Maybe you can also talk a little bit, just briefly. I know it's not like the core topic of today, but like what might a client expect if they move the IRA offshore, if they do start to work with us? What would be like the asset classes that would be covered, or like the typical markets that we look at, just for the people who haven't heard from us before? What kind of investments do we look at?
Yeah, it is also a good point. So as I mentioned before, with WHVP, it's really about the global diversification. So since our clients obviously are from the US, they already have the majority of their assets in the US. So where we add value is in taking these assets out of the US dollar and move it into different other currencies. There is like a major part in Switzerland, since the Swiss franc is just one of the safest currencies globally and hold up its value very well also during the last couple of years. But then there will also be other investments in other geographical regions where it makes sense, and these investments are like in equities. So I think most people know what equities are, but also fixed income bonds, and then the currencies I just mentioned. And you can even also have precious metals like gold, silver, platinum, whatever you want or need. And this is something which, depending on the level, I have to admit, but usually it's not something we just decide over you and say, okay, that's what you get. So, but it is a discussion where we talk to the client and say, okay, look, that's our idea, that's how we want to invest, and are you okay with that? And then we move forward.
Yeah, maybe that's also a good opportunity to like tease our next webinar a little bit, because Jess, you have become our like chief webinar officer over the past few months.
I want that in my title.
And you have done a lot of great webinars that are also available on our other channels, but you're going to do one specifically on IRAs in January. So we have now given like a high level overview over what's possible, why does it make sense, how does the setup work broadly speaking. But I think for people who are interested, I mean, we are always available. I mean, shoot us an email or fill out the contact form. We are happy to have a one-on-one conversation. But for the people that might want to have more information before they reach out to us, they can certainly also go to our website. We have like a tab called Insights and then Webinar. And there you can sign up for free and have like a 45-minute deep dive with you where you really go into the details and the ins and outs of setting everything up.
Yeah, I'll make sure to actually, you can go to our website. We encourage all of our listeners to go to our website, but I'll also put that registration link in the comment section, in the detailed sections below the description of the video, so you can find it there as well, and just directly, while you're watching, sign up for the webinar. Yeah, it's been fun. I think we've done a pretty good job of covering kind of what offshore IRAs are, what types you can kind of move out. I think the only thing that we kind of maybe missed a little bit, and this is a bit more of a complex structure that I'll talk more about in the webinar certainly, but that's an IRA LLC. So there's a structure where you can actually actively manage your IRA by setting up an LLC. Again, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a total professional, so I want to say that, but we do also work with IRA LLCs. So that is something that's also possible for maybe the listener who has that structure already and is wondering if that's possible. That is also possible. Do we have any final thoughts that we want to leave with our audience before we wrap the episode up today?
Yeah, I think from my side it would really be that if you plan for your future, if you plan how to invest and manage your wealth, don't forget your IRAs.
Thanks again for joining us on this episode of the Swiss Money Secrets podcast. If you would like to learn more about WHVP and what we do, check us out on our website at whvp.ch. Or you can check us out on any of our social media handles on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, or Instagram by simply searching WHVP. Have a great rest of your day.